The rain poured down with a quiet ferocity, each drop slapping against the pavement like tiny, furious fists. I'd left my umbrella at home, of course, caught in the romantic notion that maybe tonight I could feel something, anything, other than the dull monotony that had shadowed me for months. I shoved my hands deeper into my coat pockets, head bent low, the icy drizzle soaking through my collar and sending chills down my spine. Then, through the mist and the haze of neon lights, I saw her. She was standing at the edge of the street, her dark hair falling in wet waves over her shoulders, mascara smudging beneath her eyes as if she'd just finished crying. She wore a fitted, midnight blue dress, one that clung to her as if afraid to let her go, and her skin gleamed like pale marble under the streetlight. For a moment, I thought I was imagining her, a siren in the storm, a vision born out of desperation and rain. But she was real, and somehow, she was looking straight at me. "Are you all right?" I called out, not even sure if she could hear me over the rain. Her gaze stayed locked onto mine, a dark intensity in her eyes that made my chest tighten. She didn't answer, just kept staring, like she was searching for something in my face, some truth I hadn't yet discovered. Without thinking, I took a step closer, then another, until I was standing right in front of her. I realized that I hadn't spoken to a stranger, let alone a woman as striking as her, in what felt like years. And now here she was, inches away, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite place. Was it despair? Curiosity? Or something darker, something that made my instincts scream but my heart pound all the same? "What are you doing out here?" I asked softly, feeling like an intruder in her world. "You'll catch your death in this weather." She didn't smile. Her lips were parted slightly, as if she'd been about to speak, but then changed her mind. I realized with a pang that she was shivering, so without waiting for her permission, I shrugged off my coat and draped it over her shoulders. She looked down at it, fingers brushing over the fabric, and I caught a glimpse of delicate hands, pale and trembling. "Thank you," she finally murmured, her voice low and rough like she'd swallowed a handful of broken glass. I wasn't expecting anyone to stop. I shrugged, trying to mask the nervous energy bubbling in my chest. "Guess I couldn't just leave you out here alone." She glanced up at me, a small, hesitant smile playing at the corner of her lips. It wasn't a smile of joy, but rather one of acceptance, as if she'd long given up on kindness but was willing to indulge in it one last time. "I'm Elara," she said finally, extending a cold, rain-dampened hand. "Aiden." I took her hand, feeling a strange warmth bloom where our skin met, despite the chill. "You, live around here?" She shook her head, her gaze drifting somewhere past me, as if she were watching something invisible. "I just ended up here. I didn't plan on staying. But I couldn't leave either." Her words left an odd taste in my mouth, a metallic tang like blood or rust. There was something haunting about the way she spoke, like she was suspended between two worlds, caught in a limbo of her own creation. I wanted to ask her more, to know what kind of past could bring a woman like her to stand alone in the rain. But something held me back. Maybe it was the sadness in her eyes, or the way her fingers clutched my coat like it was a lifeline she couldn't afford to let go of. A taxi sped by, sending a spray of water up into the air, and Elara flinched, pulling my coat tighter around her. I realized with a pang that I didn't want to let her go. There was something about her, something fragile and dangerous all at once, that made me want to pull her close, to shield her from whatever shadows chased her. "Do you have somewhere to go?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She hesitated, her gaze flicking away from mine. "No. Not tonight." I swallowed hard, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "Then let me walk you somewhere. I live nearby. It's nothing fancy, but it's dry." For a second, I thought she might refuse. Her eyes flickered with doubt, a brief moment of hesitation, but then she nodded, and a strange, almost resigned expression settled over her face. All right. Just for a while. I led her through the rain-soaked streets, the silence between us heavy with things unsaid. She followed closely, and I could feel her gaze on me from time to time, sharp and calculating, as if she were trying to unravel me with her eyes alone. By the time we reached my apartment, I felt as though I'd been stripped bare, laid open to a woman I barely knew. We stepped inside, and I quickly handed her a towel. She took it without a word, dabbing at her face and hair while I watched her from the corner of my eye. She moved with a quiet grace, a sort of practiced elegance that felt strangely out of place in my humble apartment. Her eyes flicked over my belongings, lingering on the framed photos on the shelf, the stack of books by the couch, as if she were cataloging every detail. "Thank you," she said again, but this time her voice was softer, almost vulnerable. She looked around the apartment, her gaze landing on the single painting I had on the wall, a dark, abstract piece that always reminded me of storms and shipwrecks. "Do you paint?" she asked, surprising me. I shook my head, feeling oddly self-conscious. "No, just, thought it looked interesting." "You like art?" She didn't answer, just kept staring at the painting, a wistful look creeping into her eyes. "It's beautiful. Like something out of a dream, or a nightmare." Her words sent a shiver down my spine, a feeling I couldn't quite name tightening in my chest. She turned to me then, her gaze piercing, as if she'd seen something in that painting that resonated with her own secrets. And in that moment, I felt an inexplicable urge to protect her, to shield her from whatever darkness haunted her. But I knew, deep down, that I was the one being drawn into her shadows. As the hours slipped by, we talked in whispers, our words drifting into the night like smoke. She told me bits and pieces of her life, fragments that hinted at pain and loss, at dreams that had crumbled into dust. She was like a puzzle with missing pieces, a mystery I couldn't resist. And when dawn broke, casting its pale light over her face, I realized something. I didn't want her to leave. But as if sensing my thoughts, she rose from the couch, slipping my coat off her shoulders. "Thank you, Aiden. For tonight." I wanted to ask her to stay, but the words caught in my throat. She gave me one last, lingering look before stepping out into the early morning light, disappearing into the mist like a phantom. And as I watched her walk away, I felt a strange emptiness settle in my chest, a hollow ache that hadn't been there before. I didn't know it then, but Alara had already planted the seeds of something dark and twisted in my heart, a longing that would lead me down a path from which there would be no return. It had only been a few days since that rainy night, but thoughts of Alara consumed me. Her voice echoed in my head, her eyes, the way they lingered with sadness yet held a spark of danger I couldn't ignore. Every minute that passed only seemed to deepen the ache she'd left in my chest, a haunting reminder that I had let her walk away without so much as a promise to see each other again. Yet, as fate would have it, Alara didn't leave my life as easily as she'd entered it. Late one evening, as I was locking up the shop where I worked, I spotted a shadow lingering near the entrance. At first, I dismissed it as paranoia, but as I stepped closer, the figure emerged from the darkness. It was her, Alara, looking as striking as the night we'd met. She wore a long, dark coat, her hair slightly disheveled, her eyes colder than before but piercingly beautiful. A faint smirk curved her lips, as if she'd been expecting me to come out and find her. "Aiden," she murmured, her voice softer than I remembered, almost vulnerable. "Alara," I stammered, caught off guard. 100 questions flooded my mind, but all I could manage was, what are you doing here?" I couldn't stay away. She looked away, her gaze drifting to the ground as if embarrassed. "You were kind to me that night, Anne. I don't meet many kind people." There was something in the way she spoke, a sadness that tugged at something deep inside me. I wanted to reach out to her, to erase that sorrow from her face, but I held myself back. I didn't want to scare her off. Instead, I cleared my throat and nodded toward the coffee shop across the street. "Would you like to sit down?" A faint smile flickered on her lips. I'd like that. In the warmth of the coffee shop, with the soft hum of conversations around us, Elara began to open up, little by little. She told me bits and pieces of her life, each fragment laced with hints of tragedy and loss. She'd grown up in a rough neighborhood, she said, had learned early on that the world wasn't kind. Her father had left when she was young, and her mother, well, she didn't say much about her mother. But there was a darkness in her eyes whenever she mentioned her past, a heaviness that seemed to drag her down. And yet, despite everything, she had a resilience about her. A fierce independence that seemed to burn beneath the surface, like a flame that refused to be extinguished. I found myself captivated by her, drawn to her in a way that defied reason. She was like a moth drawn to a flame, and I was helpless to resist. As the night wore on, I began to feel a strange sense of purpose, a need to protect her, to show her that not everyone in the world was cruel. I wanted to be the one to give her hope, to pull her from the shadows she seemed so deeply entangled in. I knew it was irrational, that I barely knew her, but in that moment, none of it mattered. By the time we left the coffee shop, dawn was breaking, casting a soft glow over the city. Elara looked at me, her gaze softer, almost grateful. She reached out, her fingers brushing against mine, and for a brief, electric moment, I thought she might kiss me. But instead, she pulled back, her expression guarded once more. "Thank you, Aiden," she whispered. "For tonight." "Anytime," I replied, my voice barely audible. She hesitated, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. "I might need to ask you for something, someday," she said, her voice low, almost hesitant. "A favor. Would you be willing to help me?" My heart thudded in my chest, the weight of her words sinking in. I didn't know what kind of favor she was talking about, but I knew, deep down, that I would do anything for her. Anything. "Of course," I replied, without a moment's hesitation. A strange look crossed her face, a mixture of relief and sadness, and she nodded. "Thank you, Aiden. You don't know how much this means to me." And with that, she slipped away into the dawn, leaving me standing alone on the street, the ghost of her touch lingering on my skin. Over the next few weeks, Elara became a constant presence in my life, drifting in and out like a shadow. Sometimes she'd show up unexpectedly, asking to borrow a few dollars, or a place to stay for the night. Other times, she'd disappear for days on end, leaving me worried, restless, and desperate for any sign of her. Each time she returned, she looked a little more worn, a little more fragile, as if the weight of her secrets was slowly breaking her down. I tried to ignore the whispers of doubt that crept into my mind, the nagging feeling that something was wrong. But each time, she'd look at me with those sad, haunted eyes, and all my doubts would melt away. I convinced myself that I was helping her, that I was the one good thing in her life. I was blind to the warning signs, too consumed by my own feelings to see the truth. One night, as we sat together in my small apartment, Elara looked at me, her gaze intense, almost desperate. "Aiden," she murmured, reaching out to take my hand. I need your help." My heart pounded in my chest, the weight of her words settling over me like a heavy fog. "Anything," I replied, without a second thought. She hesitated, her fingers tightening around mine. I owe someone money," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "A lot of money. And I don't know how I'm going to pay it back." A cold chill ran down my spine, but I forced myself to stay calm. "How much?" I asked, my voice steady. $10,000, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. I swallowed hard, the weight of her words sinking in. It was a lot of money, more than I had ever saved up, but the look in her eyes, the desperation. I couldn't bear to see her like this. I told myself that this was my chance to prove myself to her, to show her that she could rely on me. "I'll find a way," I promised, my voice barely audible. She looked at me, her eyes wide with shock and gratitude. "Aiden, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," I replied, forcing a smile. "I'll take care of it. I'll take out a loan if I have to." She reached up, her fingers brushing against my cheek, and for a brief, heart-stopping moment, I thought she might kiss me. But instead, she pulled back, her expression guarded once more. "Thank you, Aiden," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. You don't know how much this means to me." As she slipped out of my apartment that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had crossed a line, that I was stepping into a world I didn't fully understand. But as I watched her disappear into the night, her figure fading into the shadows, I told myself that I was doing the right thing, that I was helping her. I was blind to the darkness closing in around me, too consumed by my love for her to see the truth. The loan application was approved within a week. I took the money out in cash, $10,000 in neat, cold stacks, each bill heavier than the last as I counted them in my small apartment. I knew it was reckless, I knew it was insane. But the thought of Alara in danger, of her suffering, drowned out any last remnants of logic. I had texted her that morning, letting her know that the money was ready. Now, as I sat waiting, each tick of the clock seemed to stretch into eternity. My stomach twisted with a strange mixture of anticipation and dread. Would she be grateful? Would she finally see how deeply I cared? Or was I just another fool in her game, blinded by a love she hadn't asked for? The knock came late in the evening, and my heart leaped as I scrambled to the door. She stood there, her face pale, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion. I hadn't seen her in days, and now, under the dim hallway light, she looked even more fragile than I remembered. "Aiden," she whispered, her voice a breath, a plea. "Alara," I replied, a smile pulling at my lips as I stepped back to let her in. "I've got it. The money. Everything you need." She looked at me, her eyes widening with something that almost resembled shock. I pulled the envelope from my pocket and held it out to her. She reached for it slowly, her hand trembling, her eyes locked onto mine. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of something deeper, something that felt like genuine gratitude. But as quickly as it appeared, it vanished, replaced by that guarded, unreadable expression I was starting to recognize. "Thank you, Aiden," she murmured, clutching the envelope to her chest. I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "You don't have to repay me," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. Just stay safe, okay?" She looked away, her gaze flickering to the window as if the shadows outside held some kind of answer. "It's complicated," she said softly. "I wish I could explain, but you don't have to explain anything," I cut in, desperation lacing my voice. "Just tell me that you're all right. Tell me that you're not in any real danger." Her silence was answer enough. Before I could press her further, she stepped forward, wrapping her arms around me in a sudden, desperate embrace. I froze, the warmth of her body against mine so unexpected that it sent a jolt through my chest. She buried her face against my shoulder, her hands clutching the fabric of my shirt as if she were afraid to let go. I could feel her breath against my neck, warm and shaky, and for a brief, perfect moment, I thought that maybe, just maybe, she felt something for me too. "Aiden," she whispered, her voice breaking. You're too good to me." I held her tighter, a fierce protectiveness swelling within me. "Alara, you don't have to do this alone. Whatever it is, whatever's happening. I'm here." She pulled back, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. But instead of answering, she leaned in, pressing her lips to mine in a kiss so sudden, so filled with urgency, that it left me breathless. Her hands tangled in my hair, pulling me closer as if she needed me to breathe, needed me to keep herself from drowning. My heart pounded, my mind spinning as I lost myself in the sensation, in the warmth and softness of her. In the scent of rain and night that clung to her skin. And then, as quickly as it began, it ended. She pulled away, her gaze distant, as if she'd just realized what she'd done. She looked at me, her expression a mixture of longing and regret, and for the first time, I felt the sharp sting of doubt. "Aiden," she whispered, her voice hollow. "I have to go." "Elara, wait," but before I could stop her, she was gone, slipping through the door and disappearing into the night, leaving me alone with nothing but the lingering taste of her kiss and 1,000 unanswered questions. The days that followed were a haze of anxiety and regret. I checked my phone constantly, hoping for a message, a call, anything. But the silence was absolute. It was as if she had vanished, leaving me stranded with the gnawing fear that I'd lost her forever. I found myself wandering the streets at night, hoping to catch a glimpse of her, to find some clue as to where she'd gone. But she was nowhere to be found. Then, one night, a call finally came. "Aiden." Her voice was faint, strained, as if she were calling from somewhere far away. "Elara." Relief surged through me, mixed with a fierce, desperate longing. "Where are you? Are you all right?" I can't tell you where I am," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. "But I need your help again." Something cold twisted in my gut, a sliver of doubt piercing through my relief. "Elara, what's going on? Who are you running from?" "It's complicated," she replied, her voice thick with frustration. I can't explain everything right now. I just need you to trust me. Can you do that, Aiden?" I swallowed hard, my heart pounding in my chest. "Of course. Anything you need." There was a pause, a silence so heavy it felt like it could crush me. Then, finally, she spoke. "I need you to meet someone. His name is Marcus. He knows about me. He can help, but he needs to know that he can trust you." "Marcus?" I asked, the name unfamiliar and foreboding. "Who is he? How does he know you?" She hesitated, and I could feel the weight of her secrets pressing down on me, suffocating me. Just trust me, Aiden. Go to the corner of 8th and Willow. He'll be waiting there. He'll explain everything." I wanted to argue, to demand answers, but the desperation in her voice silenced me. I knew that whatever she was involved in, it was beyond anything I could understand. And yet, I couldn't walk away. I couldn't let her face it alone. "I'll go," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'll do it for you." "Thank you, Aiden," she replied, a hint of relief in her tone. I'll see you soon. I promise." The call ended, and I stood there in the silence, my mind racing with questions, with fears I couldn't shake. I knew that meeting this Marcus was a risk, that I was stepping further into a world I didn't understand. But I was in too deep to turn back now. The next evening, I found myself standing at the corner of 8th and Willow, the city lights casting eerie shadows on the cracked pavement. I didn't know what to expect, but as the minutes ticked by, I grew more and more certain that I was making a mistake. Then, out of the darkness, a man approached. He was tall, with a rugged face marked by faint scars and eyes that were cold, calculating. His gaze settled on me, assessing, and a chill ran down my spine. "Aiden," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Elara told me you'd come." I nodded, forcing myself to stay calm, to keep the fear from showing on my face. "Who are you? And why does Elara need your help?" A faint smirk tugged at his lips. "She's in deeper than you realize, kid. And if you want to keep her safe, you'll do exactly what I say." I clenched my fists, anger flaring in my chest. "What do you mean? What's going on?" He leaned in, his gaze piercing. "Elara owes a debt. And it's not just money. She's been running from people you don't want to cross, and by helping her, you've put yourself in their sights too." The words hit me like a punch to the gut, the weight of his threat sinking in. But instead of fear, I felt a fierce protectiveness surge within me. What do I have to do? I asked, my voice steady. Marcus's smirk widened, a glint of something dark and dangerous in his eyes. There's a way to settle this. But it won't be easy. You'll need to prove your loyalty, to show them that you're willing to do whatever it takes. I swallowed hard, the weight of his words pressing down on me. I knew I was stepping into a world of shadows, of secrets and lies. But for Elara, I was willing to risk everything. Tell me what I have to do, I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. And in that moment, I sealed my fate. The air was thick with tension as I followed Marcus through narrow alleys and side streets, the towering buildings casting shadows that swallowed us whole. We didn't exchange words. His pace was relentless, his silence unnerving. The city had never felt more unfamiliar, every street and corner now tinged with an undercurrent of danger I had never felt before. Finally, we stopped in front of an old, run-down building tucked between a row of abandoned warehouses. The place reeked of decay, and a sense of dread pooled in my stomach. Marcus glanced back at me, his gaze sharp, almost mocking, as if testing me. Ready to prove yourself, kid? He asked, his voice low and laced with dark amusement. I swallowed hard, steadying myself. For Elara, yes. Just, tell me what I need to do. He smirked, clearly pleased with my answer. Good. Keep that attitude. You're gonna need it. Without another word, he led me inside, the creaking door giving way to a dimly lit room that reeked of mold and cigarettes. Around a worn table sat 3 men, their eyes narrow and assessing as they looked me up and down. The air was heavy with an unspoken threat. A dark warning that I was stepping onto dangerous ground. Marcus nodded to the men, his expression shifting from smug to serious. This is Aiden, he announced, his voice cold and commanding. Elara's friend. The way he said it made me uneasy, as if friend was something twisted, something disposable. One of the men, a burly guy with tattoos snaking up his neck, leaned forward, his gaze sharp and predatory. So, he drawled, his voice thick with disdain, you're the one willing to go to hell for that girl. Admirable. But foolish. I forced myself to stay calm, to meet his gaze without flinching. I'm here to help her. That's all that matters. The man chuckled, a sound that was more menace than amusement. We'll see about that. He nodded to Marcus, who pulled something from his jacket pocket and placed it on the table, a small, unmarked envelope. This, Marcus said, pushing the envelope toward me, contains everything you need for your first task. You follow the instructions exactly, no questions asked. Got it? My pulse raced as I reached for the envelope, the weight of it in my hand somehow heavier than I'd expected. What's inside? Marcus's gaze hardened. I told you, no questions. I clenched my jaw, nodding. Fine. I understand. The tattooed man leaned back, smirking. Let's see how far that devotion really goes. I left the building feeling like I'd stepped into a nightmare. The envelope burned in my pocket as I made my way home, my mind racing with possibilities. I didn't know what I was getting into, but whatever it was, I knew it was far from anything I'd ever done. Yet, as thoughts of Elara flickered in my mind, her haunted eyes, her whispered pleas, I knew I couldn't back down. I had made a choice, and I would see it through. Back in my apartment, I finally opened the envelope, my hands shaking. Inside was a slip of paper with a simple set of instructions: deliver the package. Do not open it. 11 p.m. sharp. Corner of Harper Street and 9th, alone. I stared at the instructions, the simplicity of the task doing nothing to ease the dread coiling in my gut. But I had no choice. I knew that if I hesitated, if I failed, I'd lose any chance of helping Elara. So I took a deep breath, slipping the paper back into the envelope, and prepared myself for whatever lay ahead. The following night, I arrived at the designated corner with minutes to spare, a small, brown package tucked under my arm. I had no idea what was inside, and I didn't want to know. All I had to do was deliver it, just as Marcus had instructed. But as the seconds ticked by, a sense of unease crept over me, a feeling that I was being watched. Then, out of the shadows, a man appeared. He was tall and lean, his face obscured by the hood of his jacket. He approached me with a slow, deliberate stride, his gaze hidden but intense. Without a word, he extended his hand. I handed over the package, my heart pounding as his fingers closed around it. For a moment, our eyes met, and in that brief instant, I saw something dark and merciless in his gaze, a cruelty that sent a chill down my spine. "Good boy," he murmured, his voice a low growl. "Tell Marcus he made a good choice." With that, he turned and disappeared into the night, leaving me standing alone on the empty street, my skin crawling with unease. I wanted to go after him, to demand answers, but I knew better. This world was governed by rules, and one of those rules was simple: don't ask questions you don't want the answers to. Over the next few days, I completed more deliveries. Each time, the instructions were the same: pick up a package, deliver it to a shadowy figure at some remote corner of the city, and leave without a word. Each task was simple, straightforward, but the weight of what I was doing gnawed at me. I knew I was tangled in something dangerous, something illegal, but every time I thought of walking away, I remembered Alara's face, her pleading eyes, and I pressed on. I was in too deep. There was no going back. Then, one night, everything changed. I had just completed a delivery and was heading home when my phone buzzed. It was Alara. My heart leaped as I answered, relief flooding through me at the sound of her voice. "Aiden," she whispered, her voice thick with urgency. "I need to see you. Now." "Where are you?" I asked, my pulse racing. "Meet me at the old pier." "Alone." Before I could respond, the line went dead. The pier was empty, the cold night air biting into my skin as I waited. The only sound was the lapping of waves against the wooden pillars, a haunting rhythm that seemed to echo my own unease. I scanned the shadows, searching for any sign of her, my nerves stretched thin. Finally, I saw her, emerging from the darkness. She looked different, worn and weary, as if the weight of her secrets had finally caught up to her. Her eyes held a sadness, a fear I hadn't seen before. "Alara," I murmured, reaching out to her. She flinched, pulling back. "Aiden, you shouldn't have gotten involved." I froze, her words cutting deeper than I expected. What do you mean?" "I did this for you." She looked away, her gaze distant. "I never wanted you to be a part of this. You don't understand what you've done, what you've gotten yourself into." Frustration flared in my chest. "Then help me understand. Tell me what's going on, Alara. I've done everything you asked, risked everything for you, and I still don't know why." She hesitated, her face contorted with guilt. "They made me. I didn't have a choice. I owe them, Aiden. And now, because of me, so do you." The truth crashed over me, the weight of her words settling in. I had thought I was helping her, that I was saving her from something terrible. But now, I realized that I had only trapped myself in the same web of lies and danger. "Alara," I whispered, my voice trembling. "What have you done?" She looked at me, her eyes filling with tears. "I'm so sorry, Aiden. I never meant for you to get hurt." I wanted to hold her, to comfort her, but a part of me knew that it was too late. We were both trapped, caught in the web of our own mistakes, our own misguided loyalty. And as we stood there on the pier, the weight of our choices pressing down on us, I realized that there was no escape. Not for her. And not for me. The night clung to me like a shroud as I made my way back from the pier, the weight of Alara's confession pressing down on me with every step. I felt hollow, like something vital had been stripped away. She had used me, maybe out of desperation, maybe out of something darker, but the fact remained, I had risked everything, lost pieces of myself, all for a love that may never have been real. Days passed in a haze. I didn't contact Marcus, and I ignored his messages. I was done with his errands, with delivering nameless packages to faceless men under the cloak of night. I was done with all of it. Yet, no matter how much I wanted to walk away, I knew that the invisible chain linking me to Alara and her world would never let me go. One evening, as I sat alone in my apartment, nursing a drink and the sting of betrayal, there was a knock at my door. The sound jolted me out of my stupor, and I stood, pulse racing. A part of me hoped it was Alara, here to explain everything, to say she needed me in some way. That wasn't tainted by lies. But when I opened the door, it wasn't her. It was Marcus. He pushed his way inside without a word, his expression unreadable as he scanned the room, finally settling his gaze on me. Ignoring my calls, Aiden. Not a smart move. I clenched my jaw, anger simmering beneath the surface. I'm done, Marcus. I'm not doing any more of your dirty work. He smirked, unbothered by my defiance. Oh, I don't think you understand, kid. This isn't something you can just walk away from. When you stepped into my world, you signed on for life. I took a step back, bracing myself. I don't care. I did what you asked. I did it all for her, and now I'm done. Marcus chuckled, a dark, humorless sound that chilled me. For her, huh? Poor, sweet, foolish Aiden. You still don't get it, do you? I froze, a sense of dread unfurling in my gut. What do you mean? He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn photograph, holding it up so I could see. It was a photo of Alara, laughing, her face filled with a joy I'd never seen. And beside her, his arm wrapped around her waist, was Marcus. The sight of them together, her looking up at him, her eyes full of warmth, hit me like a punch to the gut. I stumbled back, my mind reeling. No, that's not, she would never, she would, and she did, Marcus said, his voice cold and smug. Alara and I go way back, Aiden. She's been by my side for years. Every desperate plea, every helpless look she gave you, it was all part of the plan. I shook my head, my hands trembling. No. She told me she was in danger. She needed my help. Of course she did, Marcus sneered. She knew you'd fall for her. That's what you do, isn't it? You play the hero, swooping in to save the damsel in distress. He paused, his gaze hardening. But this time, Aiden, you're just another pawn. The betrayal seared through me, leaving a hollow ache where my heart had once been. I had been so blind, so eager to believe her, to believe that I was the one she needed. And all along, I had been nothing more than a means to an end. So what was this all for? I asked, my voice hoarse. The deliveries, the errands, what did you use me for? Marcus leaned in close, his breath hot against my skin. You were our cleanup, our cover. With every delivery you made, you became the face in case the cops ever came sniffing around. You've been laundering money, moving stolen goods, tying yourself up in crimes that could land you in prison for life. His lips twisted into a cruel smile. And now, you're a liability. The weight of his words sank in, the true depth of my entrapment washing over me like ice water. I had been a fool, a lovesick idiot who'd willingly sacrificed everything for a woman who had played me from the start. And now, I was disposable. I don't remember the rest of that night clearly. I remember the rage that pulsed through me, the sense of betrayal that clawed at my chest. I remember Marcus's mocking laughter as he left, leaving me alone to wallow in the ruins of my own delusions. And I remember making a decision, a dark resolve hardening within me. If they thought they could use me, ruin me, and leave me broken, they were wrong. The next day, I began my own investigation. I traced the deliveries I'd made, using every scrap of information I could find, every name, every address. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give me a map of their operations, a faint thread of the world Marcus and Elara had built in the shadows. But no matter how much I uncovered, it all led back to one person, Elara. She was the key, the heart of it all. And as much as I wanted to hate her, to forget her, I couldn't shake the twisted hope that maybe, somehow, she had cared for me, even if only for a moment. So, late one night, I followed her. I found her in a dimly lit bar on the edge of town, her figure illuminated by the soft glow of neon lights. She looked as beautiful as ever, her features softened by the shadows, her gaze distant as she sipped her drink. I hesitated, my heart pounding, every instinct screaming at me to walk away. But I couldn't. I needed answers. I needed closure. I approached her, and her eyes widened. As she saw me, a flicker of something, guilt, perhaps, passing over her face. "Aiden," she whispered, her voice laced with surprise. "What are you doing here?" I clenched my fists, struggling to keep my voice steady. "I know everything, Elara. About Marcus, about the deliveries, about us." She looked away, her expression unreadable. I never wanted you to find out like this." "Why?" The word escaped me, raw and aching. "Why did you do this? Why use me?" She took a deep breath, her gaze dropping to her drink. "Because I didn't have a choice, Aiden. Marcus, he owns me. He has for years. I had no way out, no way to escape, and when I met you, I thought maybe you could be my way out." I stared at her, the hollow ache in my chest growing with every word. "So you never cared about me? None of it was real?" She hesitated, and for a brief, agonizing moment, I thought I saw a flash of regret in her eyes. "It was real, at least, some of it was. But I couldn't let you get too close. Marcus would have destroyed you." "He already has," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "And so have you." She looked down, her shoulders slumping as if the weight of her choices had finally caught up with her. "I'm sorry, Aiden. I'm so sorry." But her apology did nothing to ease the pain, the hollow emptiness that gnawed at my soul. I had given everything for her, sacrificed pieces of myself I could never get back, and all for a love that had been a lie. As I walked away from her that night, I knew that I would never be the same. The man I had been, the man who had believed in love and loyalty, was gone, replaced by someone colder, harder. But as I left her behind, a part of me couldn't help but wonder if she had ever really cared, if there had been a flicker of truth in her lies. And that thought, that lingering doubt, was the cruelest betrayal of all.